All right, today we are talking about raised bed garden basics. So I'm just going to really kind of keep this somewhat short and simple, as short and simple as I can, and talk about raised beds and why they're so popular and why they're so great for the garden. And we'll also be talking about all the benefits of it, as well as what to build your raised beds out of, the different types of materials that you might use. I've got an example here of one that we sell that I'm going to show how it kind of goes together. It's a really simple, easy setup for a raised bed garden. And then we'll talk a little bit longer and a little bit more at length about the soils and the different types of things that you want to put in your raised beds. I think a lot of people have always considered doing raised beds, but maybe have been a little bit timid about it because they don't know a lot about it. Maybe you have raised beds. Maybe you purchased a home that has them and you don't know what to do with them. And we're going to talk about all those different types of things, how to refurbish your raised beds if you've got old ones that need a soil enhancement. We're going to talk about how to build them, and we're going to talk about the soil. So that's one of the most important parts of raised bed gardening. A lot of people say that when they grow in raised beds for the first time, they'll never go back to regular in-ground raised or in-ground growing, because raised beds are very successful. You can become very successful growing in a raised bed, and so they're very easy to do. It also helps if you got small spaces. So maybe you live in a condo, even an apartment. We can talk about, containers being a raised bed essentially. But if you've got small spaces, maybe you've got a yard that you just want to confine, lots of different reasons that you might do raised beds. But let's talk about some of the benefits there. Of the advantages of growing in a raised bed. I think probably the number one thing that I always think of is less weeds. I think if we've ever grown in the ground, if you've ever grown a vegetable garden or even a flower bed in the yard, you get weeds. I mean, every time you seem like you dig a hole, you plant something, it's all clear of weeds, and then right around the plant typically, you get a lot of weeds growing. That's because the soil gets disturbed and there's weed seeds that are in the soil and have been there for many years. And so when you disturb the soil, you bring those weed seeds up to a germination level that wasn't there before. So you get a lot of weeds growing, and then of course they're level with the ground, and so typically you're going to get weed seeds growing in from your lawn or from a neighbor's yard, and just naturally from the neighborhood through wind. They're going to blow into your yard and into your vegetable garden. So weeds are one of the main reasons that I think a lot of people grow in raised beds. Also, it helps with critters. So, some of the slugs, issues that we might have, other bug issues that you might find. Rabbits can cause an issue. Also, it gives you a structure, gives you a frame to be able to build something onto. Let's say you have deer issues. If you've got deer problems, deer eating your vegetables, then definitely it's easier to contain a raised bed because you've got a frame that you can actually attach something to keep them out. So lots of great benefits there for your weed control, but also for critter control. Raised beds have great drainage. So that's another key thing, is a lot of us have poor soil in this area. So if you've got clay soil, if you've got sandy soil, then sandy soil, you're going to have really good drainage. It's going to drain too fast. Clay soil, it might not drain very quick at all. And so while we can improve those soils, and we've talked about that in the past, you can improve those soils and make them better, but raised bed gardening might be an easier, quicker thing for you to do to help with your drainage issues, because raised beds are going to drain very well. And then also your soil is going to warm up. So when we're talking about spring, really this happens more in the spring. So when you get into that late March, early April time frame, and you're getting that itch to go out there and plant your tomatoes, in raised bed gardens you can actually start a little bit earlier than most of us or everybody else that might be planting in the ground. So raised bed gardens, growing in containers, you can start a little bit earlier because that soil is going to warm up a little bit quicker. Now that has a slightly adverse effect. As we get cooler, raised beds are going to get colder faster. But we'll talk about that as we go along, about how you can combat that. And then also your pH. pH is one of the most important things. I've talked about pH at length in some of my other seminars, but pH is really important when you're growing vegetables especially, but also when you're growing anything. At the right pH level, when you apply a fertilizer, any kind of plant food to your plants, if your pH isn't right, then that plant can't absorb any of those nutrients that you gave it. You can't absorb a percentage of it. So let's say you're growing your lettuces, which is what we're going to be talking about here in the fall. As we get into the fall season, growing lettuces, turnips, beets, carrots, all those great cole crops. So let's say your pH is at a 5.5, which is a very common pH in the Hampton Roads area. So when you've got a very low pH, which is very, very normal, then you're only going to get about 30 to 40% of the plant food that you give those plants. So getting your pH right is very important, and that's one of the benefits of growing in raised beds, is we can change the pH very quickly if we need to. But usually when we apply these new soils or we make our soil media, which we're going to talk about at length, most of these are neutral soils. So most of them are going to be right around in that 6.5 to 7 range, which is perfect for growing vegetables in. So that is another benefit. Less soil erosion. So maybe you've got a slanted yard, maybe you've got a hill that you really, is your full sun location, and that's where you want to grow your vegetable garden, but you couldn't do it because you have soil erosion issues. Well, because of the frame, because of the system that you're containing your soil with, you should have less erosion problems. It's easier on the back. So I definitely know that. I have bad back problems. I love raised beds because it brings it up a little bit higher. I don't have to worry about getting down too far. Or I can just use a kneeler and sit on my knees, and then I can get it right there. It's very easy to work in a raised bed. So raised beds have that benefit as well, as about saving your back. And you can build raised beds up. I'm going to talk about that when I show my Gronomics raised bed. That you can build these up to a certain height. You can put them on legs, you can put them on supports, and different ways of getting them up a little bit higher so that all of us can garden, no matter if we have back problems, maybe we've got other issues, kids, it can bring it up to the level of where kids are so they can enjoy it. Lots and lots of advantages of being able to control the height of your raised beds. Let's see, it's also easier to freshen up each year. So that's kind of one of the benefits. If you've got raised beds, we'll talk about how you can freshen that up just by adding some soil. Whereas you don't have to kind of go into your normal vegetable garden or your flower beds, till up the soil, add compost, add nutrients, do all that kind of hard work because that soil gets very compacted. You have a nice loose soil, and all you might have to do is just freshen it up. So freshening up your raised beds is a very easy process that you can do each year. Also, they take less space. So typically, a raised bed garden is going to take less space actually than what you might grow in the ground. For example, I always use squash. A lot of us grew squash or zucchini this year, and they're kind of running plants. Now, you can stake them, but most of the time they're going to run, and if they run in a vegetable garden, watermelons, pumpkins, some of those different types of squash, those are going to run and take up some space. But in a raised bed, they usually trail out the side, and they don't consume as much of the raised bed space. So raised beds actually do save space. Plus, you can contain them. So let's say you've only got a 2x4 area that you can grow in, and you want to do a vegetable garden there, then a raised bed might be a great solution because you can get more soil depth, you can control the soil, but it's also going to be a smaller space that you can get a little bit more emphasis into than just growing straight into the ground. It makes you, it gets you growing a little bit faster with less effort. So let's say you've got a lawn area that you want to do a vegetable garden in, and what you would typically do is kill the grass off in some form or fashion, either using a traditional method or using an organic solution to kill it. Might take multiple treatments to get rid of the grass or the weeds. Then you would need to cut some sort of edge. Then you would need to either hill up soil, so you're going to need to bring in soil. You might have to till up your soil. You're going to have to get your soil tested. We're going to have to make sure the pH is right. We're going to have to do a lot of different things to kind of get you to the point to where you'll be very successful growing in the ground. Not to say that it can't be done. It's pretty simple. We'll help you get there. But a very easy way of doing it is, even if you've got grass and you build a raised bed on it, let's say it's 6 inches high to 12 inches high, most of those, if you put soil in that, you're not going to have any weed issues right there. And you can start it right on top of grass. You can put down newspaper. We'll talk about all that here in a little bit. But it could get you growing a little bit quicker. It could get you going much faster, especially if you buy some of these prefabricated raised beds, which is one of the ones that I'm going to show you now. Those are very simple to build and put together, and you can be growing very quickly. All you got to do is build it, put the soil in it that you want, and you're ready to roll and start growing. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about, is how you can get there faster. And then I think lastly, one of my favorite reasons for growing in raised beds is the look. I think a lot of us have grown vegetable gardens. A lot of us that are probably tuning in today have grown them or are thinking about growing them, but they can be a little messy looking. Vegetable plants are not typically the most amazing looking plants. They're not, while they do flower and some of them can look very good, they're not the most attractive plants. They're not your petunias or your pansies of the world. They're not the pretty plants that you would plant in your flower beds. But in a organized, framed, raised bed garden, it gives you that feeling of organization. It gives you that feel of a clean feel, and it just makes it look better. So that is one of my favorite reasons for doing it, especially when we talk about adding to and making our raised bed garden area bigger. If we have the space to do it, you can make a really cool looking vegetable garden by using raised beds. So that's one of my favorite reasons of doing it. So what I always talk about after we go into all the advantages of raised beds is anytime we're considering doing something new is the planning process, taking a little bit of time to plan out what we're going to do. And what I mean by that is, where am I going to go? Where am I going to put my raised beds? So where am I going to put my raised beds in my yard? Is it a full sun area? Is it shade? Those are some of the information that we might ask you if you come into our garden center to kind of plan out your process. Is how much sun are you going to have? Because that'll determine what kind of crops you can grow. And then it also helps you just kind of know the space. If it's a full sun area, that's what we're obviously going to look for vegetable gardens. But if it gets a little bit of shade, that's okay too. So think about the space that you're going to be doing. So think about where you're doing it, and then think about how big it needs to be. And then you got to start thinking about all the different types of crops you want to grow. Okay, let's talk about fall. We're getting into the fall season. So I want to do lettuce. I want to do broccoli. I want to do cauliflower, beets, carrots, turnips. You start to get this bigger list of all the different types of plants you want to grow. And then that determines how much space you might need. So that'll be another question that we typically ask is, how much are you growing? What are you growing? And then don't make it so big that you can't manage it is another important thing. I think a lot of people always grow a lot of tomatoes. Let's grow 10 or 15 tomatoes. Well, for a family of 4, that might be too much. And then we're wasting it. And maybe we're wasting the space that we could have grown other edible plants. So a little bit of planning really goes a long way. So that's kind of something that I want you to think about. And then I would always say, can you add more? Start small and grow from there. So maybe it's just one 4x4 bed this year, but think, okay, does this space have the ability for me to expand if I need to, or contract if I need to? Maybe we're going to start with a big bed, and then we were thinking about adding, but maybe we need to make it smaller. Maybe our needs have changed. So just a little bit of planning goes a long way. It really does help. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, is the planning process on how to build a raised bed and the types of soils that you're going to go into it. Because one of the major benefits, which I didn't mention because I'm going to mention it here when we get to the soil part, but I'll mention it real quick. One of the major benefits of growing in a raised bed is you control the soil. You control the growing media. You control what goes into that raised bed. And that is going to be the successfulness that you're going to get out of your raised bed, is what you put in there. And you can always change it, and you can manipulate it. And you'll get over the time that you're growing in raised beds, you'll learn, and you'll say, okay, I need a little bit more compost, or I need to thicken it up. I need to lighten it up. I need to make it more dense. I need to make it more airy. All those different types of things that you'll learn over time. With raised beds, it's so much easier to control because it's right there. It's your media. You put it in there and you get to control it. So it doesn't have to be determined by what your soil is. If it's clay-based, if it's sandy, you get to control the soil that goes into your raised beds. And we're going to talk about that in length here in a little bit. So let's go into building a raised bed. Because if you haven't done a raised bed, maybe you've got one already, and like we talked about, we're going to refurbish it. We'll get into that when we get into the soil part. But maybe you've always wanted to build a raised bed. So you can do raised beds lots and lots of different ways. There's lots of different techniques. I think one of the most the most common materials that come to mind is wood. And what type of wood do I use? Well, cedar is one of the best choices, I think. Cedar lasts for a very long time. It resists rotting due to moisture. It also has natural oils in it that help repel insects, the bad insects that crawl up into your vegetable garden. That will help resist them. It's not 100%, but cedar does have natural oils in it that will help with that. It's pretty. It gets a nice patina with it, so you're usually going to get cedar. I'm going to show you a plank here that I've got because this is part of our Gronomics, and this is cedar. But cedar usually has this really pretty color to it, and then it's going to patina over time. So it's actually going to get like a grayish color, almost like teak wood. But cedar is my #1 kind of recommended type of wood. Now, if we're not going to use cedar, then we want to use an untreated wood of some kind. I don't recommend treated wood because you don't always know what they've been treated with. Now, a lot of the harsher chemicals that they used to use to treat wood are not used as much anymore, but I always say it's better safe than sorry. So treated wood has been treated with some sort of chemical to make it resist rot and to make it last longer, which sounds great in theory for your raised bed, but just because it can resist rot might mean that it's leaching something into your soil, and I'm not 100% sure what that is. So I always say get untreated wood. Cedar is fairly common. You can get cedar pretty easily. Sometimes you might be able to find redwood. Redwood's another good option. Walnut is not a bad option either. And then if you've got to, you can use the pines or any of the conifer types of woods. Spruce, pine, those types of wood. The thicker the wood, obviously, the longer it will last. So using a 2x6 or a 2x4 versus a 1x4 or a 1x6 is going to be a little bit more beneficial. Now, if you're using cedar, you can go a little bit lighter, a little bit thinner with your wood. But wood is one of the most common ways that we talk about building raised beds. It's one of the first things I think we all think of when we're considering building raised beds is using wood. And there's lots and lots of different options for how to build raised beds. I, again, go back to my planning stage and I say, let me plan out how I'm going to build this. How much wood do I need? I need it to be 4x4. I'm going to intertwine the angles at the end. Maybe you're going to buy some braces to put the wood into. There are numerous options. On Pinterest, you can go and you can see all the different options for how to build raised beds. There's some that you can put up on legs. So if you're a builder or if you want to try that project to build a raised bed, by all means, I definitely recommend it. I'm going to show you one that you can purchase from us that is very easy and you can get started right away. But building a raised bed is fun. It's pretty easy. Just if you're going to do it out of wood, I recommend cedar or an untreated wood. So the next option is rock. Rock is actually not a bad option. Now, we don't typically live in a very rocky area. We don't have lots of large boulders or slate or normal natural stone that typically is in our yards. But if you do live in a part of the country that has a lot of rock available, then it's free to you and you can use stacked rock to create your raised bed. Basically, all you're looking to do is make a frame to keep the soil in. Now, if I'm going to use rock, the best example or the best advice that I can give you for rock is because your joints aren't going to be sealed very tightly. You're going to have a lot of pockets in there. While the soil will compact and fill those, it also can put a lot of pressure on them. So what I recommend is using weed fabric to line the entire rocked area so that your soil can stay inside your raised bed a little bit easier. Depends on what type of rock you're using, depends on all of that. But rock is not a bad option. Cinder block. So cinder block can be used. It's a very easy way of building raised beds. It also gives you little pockets that you can grow in, which is kind of cool. You can fill those with soil because it depends on how you're using the cinder block, but cinder block is a great option. Now, I will tell you one warning or one piece of advice for cinder block is if it's an older cinder block, don't use it. If you're not sure where it came from, cinder blocks actually, back when they were produced a while ago, cinder blocks were made with different types of chemicals and hard metals, and those can leach into your soil. So you don't want to use an older cinder block. Again, if you're not sure where it came from, if you got a big pile of cinder blocks in a house that you just purchased or something that you've had for a long time and you want to use them, I would recommend not unless you're 100% sure that they were produced at least in probably the past 5 years. Because anything before that, you run the risk of having some sort of harsh metal that might be in there that you can use. And I'm going to go through a couple other lists of things not to use. But cinder blocks, if they're newer, definitely work great and very easy to stack. Composite materials or plastic, you know, some of those recycled plastic products work very well. They can hold up for a very long time. Surprisingly, they're not extremely affordable. Plastic tends to be a little bit more expensive because you're dealing with molds and all that different stuff. Wood still tends to be the easiest option, and the most economical solution is still usually wood. But there are plastic and composite materials that will work as well, recycled material products. And then always just read into it. So if you're concerned that it might have something that leaches into the soil, make sure you do a little bit of research just to make sure you find out where it came from and if it's going to be safe. Usually you're almost always going to be safe with an untreated wood or cedar. So that's kind of my two favorite options, is use an untreated wood or cedar. Some of the things not to use would be old tires. While old tires are strictly or mainly rubber, there are metals in tires, and that could potentially leach into your soil. So I don't recommend tires. Let's see what else. Treated wood, I talked about. We don't want to use treated wood or pallets. Pallets are another one that became a huge trend a few years back, probably about 5-6 years ago. We're using pallets. The problem that we kind of ran into very quickly is, where has that pallet been? And what was it treated with? A lot of pallets are treated so that they hold up for a longer period. But really the other thing that kind of came to mind is, what has been transported on that pallet? Was it antifreeze? Was it some sort of oil that maybe has leaked onto that pallet? So we don't typically know 100% where the pallet came from, and I wouldn't always recommend it for growing my edible plants. Now, if you're doing a flower garden and you want to do some sort of vertical garden with a pallet, you're typically probably fine if you're not eating the plants. But if you are growing edible plants, I recommend using something that you know where it came from. So make sure it's untreated, something that you know a little bit more about. Pallets, you don't know if they've been treated. Now, there are some pallets that are now fired, basically, or oven baked, basically, so that they will hold up a little bit longer. But again, we just don't know what's been transported on pallets. So I don't always recommend using pallet wood. Railroad ties. So railroad ties are a very popular way of containing your raised beds. They're big, they last a very, very long time, but again, railroad ties are treated with many, many chemicals. I think I read something about maybe over 300 chemicals that they use on railroad ties to make them last a very long time and hold up for a long time. So while, again, they might work for your landscape or for flowers, anything that you're growing that you're not eating, railroad ties might work for. Steps in your garden might be fine for. But I wouldn't use railroad ties for my raised bed because of the concern of something leaching into the soil. Let's see, do I have any other materials? That's pretty much it. If you're not sure where the material came from, then I would recommend don't use it. Unless you can do a little bit of research into it. That's the biggest thing, is use something that you feel 100% comfortable using. And like I said, usually that's going to be wood. It's going to be something easy that you can get your hands onto, and you can get from any hardware store. So what I want to show you now is our Gronomics system. So you can see kind of here, we've got a couple pictures of this Gronomics raised bed. There's a lot of different ways of doing these, but what I've got here is what you get in this box, and I'll pull this out here in a little bit. I've got my soil set up, so I'm going to leave that for now. But what you get in your Gronomics raised bed is you get a post like this, so you get 4 of these, and then you get 8 planks. And what's really cool about these is they're dovetailed, so I'm going to show you right now how you can do this very, very easily, just so you get an idea of how simple this can be. And you know, we've carried lots and lots of different types of raised beds here at McDonald Garden Center, but this is by far one of our favorites because it's so easy to build and to do. So you've got your legs here basically, and what they have is a groove cut out on the inside. And so you get 4 of these in your kit, which is really nice. I'll put these off to the side. I'm going to build one of these so I can show you just how simple this is. Now, it's got this groove cut out here. It's got what they call a dovetail, so it's just a little Y cut out. Nice and strong, you know, not taking on a lot of wood. And then all you're going to do is just slide this right in. Now, the nice thing here is you don't have to use any tools either. So all we're going to do is just make sure we got it level and then push it down in. So it's really, really easy to do. Let me just get this all the way in here. Of course, the one that I pick is got a little bit of sawdust in it. There we go. Now you can use like a rubber mallet, which is really easy to do too. So there we go. We've got our first board in. I'm going to take the next board and just slide that right on top so you can see how quickly and easily this can go. So again, if I had a little bit of a rubber mallet, that would probably help, but we'll get this going here. Let me just put this here. All right, so we've got our two boards in place. Let me get those nice and seamed up for you. All right, so you can see that set up there, really, really easy. Let me get it on camera here. All right, so what we've got here is our first leg. We've got our two boards attached to it, and then all we're going to do is put the other leg on and go all the way around. So you can literally build this 4x4 by 13-inch bed in about a minute. Very, very easy to do. If you had a little hammer, you could use that. Maybe use a little piece of wood to protect it so you don't smash it. A rubber mallet would work very well, but you really shouldn't have to use many tools at all. Just a little bit of force gets it right in there. You know it's nice and tight and strong. Has a nice seal here in between the two boards, so it's really, really sturdy. But then what I want to show you, which is really cool, is that these are modular. Because it's got 4 cutouts all the way around the post, I can go any direction with it. So I can build these out in any different kind of assortment that I want. I can also go higher. So I'll show that as well for you. So what you would do is you'd put another board on just into the top, so it just fits into the top of this post. And then what we'll do here is we'll get another post. So this would be if you bought 2 kits, and then we'll just slide that in. So now I can go even higher. So I could add another board here. And then I can keep on going. You can go up to about 3, I think maybe 4 kits high. But once you get to 3 high, you're about 3 feet tall, which is pretty tall. So that's a pretty good size. And then again, I can go and I can build off this way, because that's easy to do. All I got to do is build it off that way. I can go this way. I can go any direction that I want. And I can keep on adding to these. And that's one of the reasons I love this Gronomics raised bed. It hasn't been treated with anything. It's all Eastern red cedar. It's very, very easy. It's all dovetails, no tools required. You can go vertical with it. You can go horizontal. You can build all these really cool shapes and designs. Maybe you can see right here, you can see all the different setups that you can do. We have these in our stores, so you can come in and pick these up. These are awesome, awesome ways to get started very, very quickly. These are, like I said, the cedar, so it's going to patina to a nice gray color. It's just a great, easy setup to get started raised bed gardening right away. I mean, you can build these in no time, fill them with soil, awesome, awesome setup, and it comes in that nice standard size of a 4x4 by 13 inches high. So you can put 12 inches of soil in it, have your nice inch lip. So it's very, very easy to do. One of my favorite ways of growing in a raised bed and getting it started very quickly. So just wanted to show those to you because I think a lot of people get a little worried, oh, you know, I got to get out there and I got to build something. I don't know how to build something. You can buy prefabricated kits. And this Gronomics raised bed is one of our favorites. It's the only one that we really sell anymore. We used to sell, and I didn't mention this in my materials, but you can use the aluminum beds, which work fine. Those typically don't break down very quickly. A little people do get worried about aluminum kind of building up in your soil. It's easy to combat, but cedar is all natural. That's why we love this. It's very simple. It's organic. It's easy to grow in, and it's just a great setup and system because it's modular, and you can change the look and the dimensions, and you can always go back and change it if you need to. So it's a really cool setup, and you can get these at all of our retail locations in Virginia Beach. So a great way to kind of get started on your raised beds. So now what I want to get into is the soil. The soil part is probably the most important thing. As I mentioned earlier, the reason that a lot of us do raised beds is because we can control the soil. And so that is one thing that I definitely want to spend a little bit more time on is what are we putting into our raised beds? So what we definitely want to talk about is knowing the size of your beds. I think that's probably where I always start with. If anybody ever comes in and says, I've got a raised bed, I built it, I need to fill it with soil. That's the next step. I mean, that's as simple as raised bed gardening gets. You build your frame, you fill it with soil, you're ready to grow. But what do you put in it and how much? And I think that's one of the most common questions we get about raised bed gardening is how much soil. And the first question we're always going to ask is, how big is your raised bed. So I'm not going to figure out all those different types of solutions, but what I am going to do is give you some advice that you can use to plan and prepare. And then also you might just come into us and let us do the math for you and figure out exactly how much soil you might need. I'll start with a basic 4x4 by 12 inch bed. So kind of similar to our Gronomics bed, they're 4x4 by 13 inches, which gives us an inch lip if we just fill it with 12 inches of soil. So what you want to do here is a little simple math of your cubic feet. So a 4x4 bed is going to be 4 times 4, which is 16. And then by a foot high is 16. So we're going to take 4 times 4 times 1, 16, and that's the cubic feet. And knowing the cubic feet will help us get really close to figuring out exactly how much soil we'll need. Now 16 cubic feet would fill it all the way to the brim. So we want to give it a little bit of space. And that's usually where I come up with the 14 cubic foot, which is half a cubic yard. A cubic yard would be 3 times 3 times 3, which would be 27. And so a yard of soil, if you've got a truck, would fill 2 4x4 raised beds. So typically you only need half a cubic yard. And the reason that I bring that up is because we're going to talk about soil and all the different types of ways of doing this. And if you're doing a bigger project and you've got access to a truck, we sell bulk soil, or you can get bulk soil all across the country. And bulk soil is a great option to keep your costs down, especially if you've got a big project. And then what we're going to do is add things to that soil to make it a little bit better. But if you're just doing a small project, let's talk about just regular soils. So first and foremost, I've got this great landscape estimator. So this is awesome. We're going to make this available after the seminar's over. So when the seminar's over, I'll come over and answer all your questions. But all of our seminars are posted so you can go back and watch them again. And we also attach our notes, and this will be attached with it. So this has a great estimator. It's got a lot of different calculations that will help you figure out how much soil you might need for your project. And then it's also got on the back, it's got all of our pricing and all of our different products that we have. So that really helps you kind of get all your planning done for your raised bed. But let's talk about some of the soils, some of the different products that you might put in there. So the first and foremost is what we're trying to do is almost create a potting soil. So what's in a potting soil? Well, potting soil typically consists of compost, some sort of vermiculite or perlite, peat moss, and that's what helps fluffen up the compost. And that's pretty much what's in a potting soil, is some form or fashion of a compost. Usually it's going to be bark. Composted bark material, and that's what's in our McDonald potting soils, is composted bark, a little bit of peat moss, a little bit of perlite and vermiculite to help break it apart and keep it nice and loose, and then there'll be a wetting agent in these. Now you don't typically need a wetting agent in a raised bed because it's a much larger thing of soil, a much larger container of soil. But if you're growing in a container, then this is all you need. So if you want to do a small space vegetable garden, maybe we're going to try some lettuces or some spinach or kale this coming fall season, you can grow that in a container very easily. If you're growing it in a pot, then use potting soil, hence the name. That's what I will always tell people. If you're growing in a pot, use potting soil. Now, if you just have one raised bed, you could use just potting soil. If you want to do it easy, you're going to need, each bag is a 1 cubic foot bag. So if you've got a 4x4 by 12 bed that we want to fill, all you would need is 13 to 14 bags of potting soil, which is a great option to just open up the bags, put it in there. You got a perfect blend and mix. We've got an organic potting soil. We've got an all-purpose potting soil. And there's lots of different types of potting soils out there. But these are really, really great professional blends, and you can put those right in. Then I've got over here our topsoil and our compost. Now those are great amendments as well. So why I brought these in is because let's say you've got a bigger project and you want to do a little bit more. So let's say you've got an 8 by 10 bed. So we've got a big bed. That's 80 square feet that we need to fill up to a certain inch level. So again, I'm not going to get into too much of the math, but I want to talk about bulk products and keeping it economical for you. So if you've got a bigger raised bed, or you want to build 10 of these Gronomics beds, if you want to build a bunch of raised beds and you've got to fill all that, then we can help you out figuring out that math, and we might do it with bulk. bulk is a great option. Now, bulk, you can get topsoil, which is going to be your base. It's going to be your composted bark matter. Now, topsoil, true topsoil, is very, very heavy, muddy, kind of gross. Our topsoil is a very, very fine, nice material. It's basically a compost that has been broken down over many, many years, and is going to be very, very fine, basically to the end of its composting life cycle. So what you're getting is a very, very fine material that is basically almost like a compost, but it's going to be your base. And so that topsoil is going to be your base material that we're going to build off of. So what we're going to do is figure out the equation to fill up your raised bed with as much topsoil as we can to really get you close to that level that you need to be at. And then we're going to amend that topsoil. So then we get into, now I've got these also in 3 bigger sizes as well. So we'll talk about those as we go through all of them. But then you're going to amend it with these different materials. So we've got peat moss, vermiculite, and perlite. So peat moss is going to help hold moisture in. Raised beds drain very well. So that was one of the main positives of doing raised beds, is that they're going to drain really well. But peat moss will help hold moisture in. It'll also fluffen up your soil. And so it'll also lighten up your soil. It'll make it a little bit less compacted. If you just use straight topsoil or straight compost, then your soil is either going to, the compost will burn it up very quickly. It can heat up to a certain degree, and it can burn the root system up and cause your plants not to grow. If you just use topsoil, it's going to get muddy. So it's going to hold a lot of moisture. It's not going to drain very well. So we need to amend those soils by adding different nutrients. So with topsoil bulk, then you would add some compost to get some more nutrients in there and get a little bit of a thicker mix. But then you would add peat moss. Now peat moss, this is just an 8-quart bag, but peat moss you can get in a bale. We carry a 1 cubic foot compressed bale, so that's going to expand and help you really kind of get a larger project done. And then you're going to add either vermiculite or perlite. Now these do very similar things. One person might like the other versus the other, but vermiculite and perlite are going to help break apart the soil and allow water to drain through, allow root systems to get through the soil, and allow oxygen to get down to the root system as well. A very important thing. So if you've ever had a potting soil, if you've ever held a potting soil, you're going to see it's got usually some composted bark material, typically. It's got a little bit of peat moss in it. It's got a little bit of perlite, those little white styrofoamy looking things. And perlite is kind of my favorite. It's the one that I always go with because it's a little bit more coarse, and I think it helps with our clay-based soil. And these both come, vermiculite and perlite, also come in 4 cubic foot bags. So a very large bag that will help for some of those bigger projects. So I bring all that up because if you've got a bunch of raised beds that you want to fill, we can do it very economically by using some bulk topsoil, some compost, some peat moss to help fluffen it up and lighten it up a little bit, and then perlite or vermiculite to help break it apart. So very, very easy way of getting you a lot of soil very easily. We can deliver soil. If you don't live in the Hampton Roads area, then most places you'll be able to find some sort of delivery. But if you've got a truck, you typically can pick up these soils and start filling them up that way. A typical pickup truck can hold 2 scoops, which is a yard of topsoil. Topsoil's heavy. So that's why we're lightening it up with all these different products. But you can typically get a yard of topsoil in a normal pickup truck, which means you can fill up 2 4x4 raised beds with that basically. And we might be able to make it go a little bit further by adding all these different elements with compost, vermiculite, perlite, and peat moss. So these are all great things of doing that. So I'm going to put these off to the side. We want to amend our soil. That's the most important thing, is amend your soil, make it lighter. I want to talk about compost here for a minute because compost is one of the best ways of refreshing a raised bed. Maybe you have a raised bed and you need to refresh it and you need to bring it back to life. You maybe haven't grown in it in a while, or it's just old and it's been sitting there, or you feel like it hasn't been as successful as it was at the beginning. And so that's typically because nutrients have gotten low. And so I want to talk about compost here for a minute, just to kind of give you an idea of all the different options that you have. So of course, our first one is our McDonald compost. McDonald compost is a really, really great blend of broken down organic matter, mainly bark material. So it's going to be a little bit thicker, a little bit chunkier, which I really like because it'll continue to biodegrade and release those nutrients. It's a really, really great compost, and it's completely organic and completely safe. So that's why I love our McDonald Garden Compost. But there are lots and lots of different types out there. And one of the reasons that we love growing in raised beds is that we have so many options of controlling our soil media, our growing media. And so compost is one of the main components of that. So let me show you a couple different ones. This is Espoma's Land and Sea Compost. Let me put it up here. This is Espoma Land and Sea Compost. This is a great compost. So it's got a little bit of cow manure in it, the land, and then it's got a little bit of the sea in there with lobster shell. So it's got crab, I think it's crab shell and lobster shell, but it's a really, really good organic compost. Just gives you something different to try. So if you want to try a different type of compost this year, this might be a great option. It's a very, very high-end, what they would kind of call maybe like a gourmet compost. So really, really cool organic land and sea compost by Espoma. This is a really nice compost. And the cool thing is almost all your soils are going to come in a 1 cubic foot bag, which makes it very easy for math. Now you can get some smaller bags of compost here and there, but most of your compost are going to come in a 1 cubic foot bag. We've got, of course, Espoma cow manure. So this is just straight up cow manure compost. Very common, very easy to use, very safe. Some people might not recommend using manures in their vegetable garden, but typically you're going to be fine. It's been done for ages. If you don't feel comfortable, don't use it. By all means, that's why we carry so many different types of compost, because we want to give you the options. But cow manure compost is a very, very dense material, and you'll feel it when you touch it. It's very, very rich. It's very thick, so it's a great compost if you need that kind of thickness. Then we've also got mushroom compost. Become more and more popular over the years. So this is Espoma organic mushroom compost. Mushroom compost is basically what they use to grow mushrooms. So you've got all this great material. They can only grow about 2 or 3 crops of mushrooms in it before they've got to scrap it and put in new material. So that's what you get, is this really, really nice material. It's a little bit thicker. It's a little bit, it's got a little bit, not huge chunks, not as big a chunks as our McDonald compost, but it's a really fine, nice material that you can use. A lot of people love mushroom compost. It's got lots of benefits, got lots of material in it. So really, really cool one to use as well. Again, just giving you the options because you get to control the soil. So now you got lots of different options to use. Now, if you want to be really, really easy too, we've also got Espoma's organic raised bed mix. So this is just pre-done for you. It's got all the different things that you need to grow in. So it's a great growing media in one bag, easy to use. Now this is a 1.5 cubic foot bag. So one bag will go a little bit further for you. So it'll cover 1.5 cubic feet. And when you go and you look at your landscape estimator that I talked about earlier, you go and check this out on our website, or you can come in and pick one up. We've got plenty of them. And then on the back, you'll see all your different sizes too. And like I was saying earlier, pretty much every soil comes in a 1 cubic foot bag. This is a 1.5 cubic foot bag to help save some space and to help save you the hassle of getting, if you've got 14 cubic foot that we need to put in there, then you don't need as many, you don't need 14 bags. You would only need about 8 or 9 bags to get you to that 14 cubic feet a little bit faster. So this is a really, really nice one. They all have mycutone in them, which is a great source of mycorrhizae, which is an awesome, awesome thing to add as well. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. So that's why I carry all these different types of compost. And again, if you don't live in the Hampton Roads area, if you can't come and see us here at McDonald Garden Center, you should be able to find lots and lots of different types of soils out there and options. There's so many different benefits to it. But again, when we're doing a raised bed, if we're doing it from bulk or if we're doing it as our own blend, you need a base, and it can't be all compost. So you need some compost, you need some topsoil, you need some vermiculite or perlite, and then you need some peat moss. You need to make your own potting soil, basically. You can't just use one element and not all the other ones. So we've got our base soil, which can be a compost and topsoil mix, or we can use just a straight potting soil or a raised bed mix that's already done for us. So I hope that kind of helps you kind of get an idea and start to plan to build your raised beds. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is, of course, we're growing now. So now that we're growing our plants, now I'm going to talk about that in my upcoming seminars about coal crops, is how to do all that. But just in general, I just want to mention for raised beds is how to feed your plants. Now, raised beds are going to be similar to a container. Like, let's say we're growing in a clay pot. Now, that's got a smaller drainage hole, which is why you got to use a potting soil. Raised beds have no bottoms to them, so you don't have to worry about the drainage as much because we know you're going to get good drainage. With a raised bed, your soil, your nutrients are still going to get depleted pretty quickly. And so typically in ground feeding our plants, we're going to do it about every month or so with a granular garden tone per se, or our McDonald green leaf is what we might use. And so you're only going to have to feed your vegetables that are heavy feeders. They need a lot of nutrients to keep producing for you. You're only going to feed those probably about every 4 to 6 weeks. Now we're going to bring that timetable in a little bit more with a raised bed garden because those nutrients are going to deplete. You've got extremely good drainage, which is a benefit. You've got this amazing soil that you've built, which is a benefit. But the nutrients that you're applying with your plant food, which is where you're getting your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your boron, your copper, your zinc, all of those great nutrients, your macronutrients and your micronutrients, all of those great nutrients that you're putting in there are going to work through there a little bit faster because you've got amazing drainage and amazing soil. So that's just one issue that you just kind of need to keep in mind. So with a granular plant food, we're going to fertilize or feed our plants every 3 to 4 weeks. So we're just going to have to do it a little bit more in order to keep that crop rolling and keep producing for you. So I just bring that up because I think it's very, very important to know that. Of course, I always recommend our Biotone, Espoma's Biotone. This is a starter fertilizer, but also has that mycorrhizae that I just mentioned. All of their soils have mycorrhizae in it, and mycorrhizae are beneficial bacteria that will attach themselves to the roots of a plant and live with that plant the entire time that it's alive. So it's a really, really great benefit. It's a symbiotic relationship. These beneficial bacteria attach themselves to the roots of the plant, and then they form a relationship where they give and take what they don't want and the other one does want. So it's a really, really great relationship that is formed between these beneficial bacteria, and it helps establish root systems very quickly, helps that root system get to the nutrients much faster. So a really, really great way of starting all your plants. You want to get this directly on the roots. So Espoma's Biotone Starter Plus, awesome, awesome way of kind of getting your plants going much, much faster. And then, of course, our McDonald green leaf plant foods are a great way of feeding. We have our traditional formula, our 12-4-8, and our organic formula, our 8-2-4. These are great ways of feeding our vegetable or edible plants. And like I mentioned, I just bring these up because those nutrients are going to work through the soil a little bit faster in a raised bed than in the ground. So we're going to feed about every 3 to 4 weeks, and then we're growing. So I'm sure you've got lots and lots of questions. There's a lot of things that might be involved with your specific setup that you might have at home. But growing in raised beds is an awesome, awesome way of doing it. So again, take a little bit of time, plan out what you want to do, how much space you need, where it's going to go, how big you want it to be. Maybe we want to expand it and make it bigger over time. So keep those things in mind. What material you're going to use to build it? Do you have the time right now to go and build a raised bed? Or do you want to do something like this great Gronomics setup? This is an awesome, awesome setup. So again, just a great way of building a raised bed. It's all prefabricated for you. It's very, very simple. And there's lots of different options out there for you. But Gronomics is a great option. Very, very easy to build. No tools required, and you can get growing very quickly. So think about the material that you might want to use. Is it cinder block? Is it brick? Is it any of those other options? But I love wood. It gives you that kind of great organic kind of feel. Cedar is the best option, I think, if you can get it. If not, just get an untreated wood. And then soil. Soil is the most important thing. This is a great time to get dirty and start to think about that. Build your raised bed. Come and talk to us. If you're in our neck of the woods, if you're in Hampton Roads, then come and talk to us. And we can help you with this landscape estimator, figure out exactly what kind of soil that you want to do. You know, maybe you want to use a specific type of compost or a specific type of soil amendments. Maybe we want to use vermiculite versus perlite and all those different options. And we can help you formulate exactly how much soil you might need to fill up your raised beds. And that's the best thing about growing in raised beds is you get to control that soil media. And you can get growing very, very quickly by doing raised bed gardening. So I hope this helps you kind of get started, the planning process. I'd say get out there, build your raised beds, an amazing growing season is coming very quickly. Our fall growing season, at least here in Hampton Roads, is one of the best. And I'm going to talk about that, like I mentioned, in a couple weeks. I hope you can join me for that seminar. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to talk about all the lettuces and kales and collards and carrots and turnips and beets and celery and all these different types of things that you can do. Onions, garlic. There's so many different options. And then, of course, we've got herb seasons coming back in. You know, maybe you started herbs in the spring and they kind of fizzled in the summer, as some of them typically will do. But another great growing season is coming our way in the September, October, November timeframe. It's an amazing time to grow all of these different ones. I love spinach. I grow spinach every year. There's nothing better than making a spinach salad from your own garden. It's just awesome. And we're going to talk about all of those different things in a couple weeks. Next week, we'll be back with a turf class. So if you're interested in rehabbing your lawn this fall season, that'll be a great one, especially if you need to start from scratch, which might be the best way to go. It might be the most economical way to go. So check us out next week as we do that. I'm going to come around and answer all your questions. If you've got any questions, stick around for that. If not, and you're taking off, thanks for joining us again. We're going to continue to do these. We're very excited to be back with our webinar online web series. Educational series, so we're very, very excited for that, and we hope you continue to come back. So if you're taking off, have a great day. I'm going to come over and answer all your questions, and thanks again for joining us. All right, hello everybody. So now I can see everybody's name and say hi. Hi, Caitlin and Michael. We got you from Morganton, North Carolina. Awesome. Hey, Sheila. And then Eleanor said, good morning, I've missed these webinars. Well, we've missed them too, so thanks for coming back. All right, so Stephanie Perry says, my neighbor gave me weeds and mushrooms. Yeah, so that can happen. Mushrooms, definitely. I mean, of course, we've had lots of rain very recently in the Hampton Roads area. I'm assuming you're from Hampton Roads, but lots and lots of rain can cause mushrooms because mushrooms basically come from some sort of wood source that's below the soil, whether it's an old root system, maybe an old log was buried down there, and so that decomposition process will send up mushrooms, and that typically you'll get a lot of mushrooms growing right after we get a lot of rain. So when we just got this hurricane that passed through Hampton Roads, a lot of us got 3 to 5 inches of rain. That's a lot of rain. Then we got a little bit more before and after. So, you know, all that rain is going to cause mushrooms to come up. Now, mushrooms can spread from your neighbor. If they get kicked around, if they get mowed over, the spores can spread and you can get mushrooms growing that way. But then, yes, weeds can come from neighbors, unfortunately. So Becky said, about how many years will your Gronomics raised beds last before they will need to be replaced due to decay? So typical cedar can last somewhere between 10 and 20 years. Now, these cedar planks, I will be honest, are about 1 inch. So I think they're a 1x6, 1x6.5. So they're not quite as thick as I typically would like. So they have a 5-year manufacturer warranty. And typically that's where I would say you're probably going to get somewhere around 5 to 7 years out of your Gronomics raised bed, which is a pretty good amount of time. The price is $169. They're a great deal right now. They're 40% off if you live locally and you can come in and see us. It's a great option, 40% off of $169, and you got a raised bed, a full-size 4x4 raised bed. So I definitely recommend them. If you want more longevity of your raised beds, for sure there's a lot of other options, and getting thicker cedar planks is probably going to be the better way to go. But then you got to figure out how to build it. You got to get some sort of corner system. You got to make sure that they're braced. And typically what I will tell you that I didn't mention earlier is once you go past 4 feet, you're going to need some sort of center brace. So let's say we're making an 8x4 raised bed. You're going to want some sort of center brace in there that's tying those two 8-foot boards together, because if you don't, they're going to bow out pretty quickly on you. Because that soil pressure pushing on them and those longer boards is going to cause them to bow out a little bit. So I hope that helps. But yeah, I would say, I mean, most of us, I know the owner has grown in our Gronomics raised beds. I have a couple other different Gronomics raised beds. I haven't done this specific one, but I got a couple that we used to sell that come on legs, and they've lasted me a good 3 or 4 years already, and they're still in great shape. So, and you can treat them. So if you want to stain them, they do make organic or safe stains for vegetable or edible growing that you can stain and coat these so that they'll last a lot longer, and they can keep that really pretty color if you like it. I like the gray color personally. All right, let's see what else we got here. Let me get back up to the top of my list. So Elena said, is there a formula or proportion for the add-ins or for the amendments? Yes, typically I would say a third, a third, a third. So at least a third of your base soil, whether it's compost and topsoil mix, whether it's just topsoil. I wouldn't use just straight compost typically because it might heat up too much. Now, if we're going to use straight compost, then we want to cut it pretty hard with peat and perlite to help kind of add some airiness in there and break it up a little bit. But typically I say a third of your base soil, which is going to be topsoil compost mix of some sort. So it sounds like maybe you've got a bigger project and we're thinking about doing bulk products. Then I would get topsoil, that's your base, and then a third of peat, and then a third of perlite. And that's as simple as you can do, but you can add in other things. And so I don't have a specific formulation for you because it can be a fourth, a fourth, a fourth. It could be a fourth of topsoil, a fourth of compost, a fourth of perlite, and a fourth of peat. So you can really change it so much. What we do want is some sort of base, some sort of main soil, whether that be topsoil and compost mix or just topsoil. And then we want to amend it with peat and perlite. And typically what I recommend when people are doing raised beds is to put a layer of topsoil in, maybe throw some compost in on that, then add a little bit of peat, a little bit of perlite, mix it all up, and then keep adding layer after layer until you fill it all the way up. So that's an easy way of kind of getting your soil to the right level, and you don't have to kind of till it all in. I would not fill it all with topsoil and then try and amend it, because then you're kind of digging very deep and trying to till very deep to get it all mixed up. So do it in layers. So I hope that helps. There's no specific proportion. It's kind of up to you. It's kind of trial and error. We would give you what we would recommend, which is always going to be some sort of base soil, topsoil, compost, and then peat moss and perlite to lighten it up and to make sure that it doesn't come compacted over time or muddy. So I hope that helped answer your question, Elena. All right, so Susan said, can you use your own compost? And if so, how old do you think it should be? So Susan, we did a whole seminar on composting. So I would definitely recommend, if you're doing compost, to go back and check out that seminar. It's on our website. You can go and view all of our old seminars. It was a nice long seminar all about composting. But for a quick, simple answer, how old should it be? It should be a finer material. It shouldn't have a lot of chunks of different things in there. So if you've turned it enough and it looks like compost, it can be used. And yes, of course you can use it. Using your own compost is so rewarding, and it's very, very beneficial. So, you know, to know all the different things that go into compost and how you can make compost faster, go back and watch our composting seminar for sure. But if you want to use compost, if you think it's ready and it's got a nice rich color to it, it doesn't have a smell to it, it smells good, smells like dirt, looks like dirt, use it for sure. It's the best thing that you could use. Awesome, awesome option. So Karen said, my zucchini are not producing. So most likely not being pollinated would be my guess. Could be a couple other issues there. If powdery mildew has gotten really bad. I know a lot of us have experienced powdery mildew in this area because of our humidity. So zucchini might need nutrients, might need enough nutrients to help keep those blooms going. If you see the bees in there, then you might need a little bit of help. We've got a product that will help set, that is basically a hormone that will help set fruit. Typically we'll recommend that if you have a lot of flowering, but not a lot of fruit production. That means something is imbalanced and you need to correct that, and using this hormone will help kind of get that plant to help set its fruit and keep those flowers longer so they can get pollinated by the bees and the butterflies. So hopefully that helps. That would be my guess, is nutrients. Check your nutrient level. Check your pH too. Maybe we need to add some calcium to get your pH changed, but also to get the calcium in there so you don't have the rot issue, the blossom end rot. So it could be a couple different things there. So Karen, if you live locally, I definitely would recommend coming in, maybe bringing a little bag of soil so we can do a quick pH test for you, figure out if your pH is way out of whack, and then also just go out there and investigate. Are the bees and the butterflies in your flowers in the morning? And typically you're going to see zucchini flowers are opening in the morning and then kind of fizzling by midday. So you want to make sure that the bees and the butterflies are able to get in there and help pollinate your zucchini. So hopefully that helps. All right, so Natasha says, hello, pondering a raised bed and was wondering about recycling old pieces of furniture such as a file cabinet, etc. So again, I kind of always get worried. I mean, I love recycling materials, and I think it's a great option. It's just a personal preference of whether you think it's safe or not. Any kind of container, anything that will contain the soil, make sure it's got drainage, will work. As long as it helps hold the soil in place, will work. It's just, is it made out of aluminum? Is it made out of some other hard metal, some heavy metal that might work into the soil? What was contained in those file cabinets? Have they been in a machine shop? You know, do they have grease and oil and different types of chemicals that might be in there? It's really hard to say. So that's kind of where I always go back to, better safe than sorry. Surprisingly, I've never been a big builder. I don't build a lot of things. That's not kind of something that I do. Love gardening, and I get out there and garden. But surprisingly, lumber is pretty economical. You can get a raised bed fairly quickly. I mean, I didn't talk about dimensions too much, but a 6-inch raised bed is plenty to grow lots and lots of things, especially if you're growing on top of soil. So if I put a 6-inch raised bed, which could be just a plank high, just a board high, and then some sort of framing system or some sort of corner system to keep those in place, I can put that right on top of the grass. I don't have to do much. As I put my new soil in there, it's going to help make the soil underneath it better so I can grow deeper rooted vegetables in years from now. So what I would typically do if I'm building like a 6-inch raised bed, very easy system. You can get a 2x6 plank of cedar very quickly and easily, attach them, make sure they're nice and sturdy in the corners, put a brace in if it's too long, fill it with soil. You can grow lettuces and carrots and turnips and beets and all that fun stuff, and spinach and kale, all that stuff through this fall season. And then what's going to happen is through the fall and winter, that soil that you put on top of all that compost and perlite and peat moss and vermiculite is going to help work its way down into the soil below and make it better. So it's going to make that soil underneath the raised bed much better, which means then you've improved your soil underneath as well. So I hope that helps, Natasha. I hope, think about it. That's personal preference there. If you feel safe with it, go for it. But do be careful, and if you have any concerns, then probably better just to go with something fresh and new that you know hasn't been treated with any or have anything in there. Susan says, do you recommend a liner? So the only time I really recommend a liner is with the rock scenario or something where I know I've got lots of gaps in the sides of my walls of my raised bed. The only other reason I might recommend a liner is if you've got a lot of voles. So let's say you've got tunnels out in your yard, mole issues. Voles are vegetarians and they're going to come in and reach your roots, especially if we're talking about growing carrots and turnips and beets and things like that. They love to get into those, of course. So if you've got issues with voles, then I might recommend a weed fabric. But typically, no, I don't. If you're going to put 6 to 12 inches of soil at minimum on top of a grass or a weedy area, it's going to kill all those. There's no sunlight. It's going to be deep enough that they won't germinate. I would probably mow it really low, maybe get a weed whacker in there, cut it down really low, maybe rake up some of that. I wouldn't put it on, 4 or 5 inch, tall weeds. But what you can do is mow it really low, put your soil right on top, and you're typically not going to have an issue. The weed fabric really is only going to help with erosion. And what it's going to end up doing is causing really more problems down the road if you use a liner, a weed fabric. And make sure it's a landscape weed fabric, because if you do use it, you want to make sure that the water and the nutrients can get up and down through it, rather than like a plastic. A plastic is not going to be any good. Now, what I do recommend sometimes, and definitely not a bad thing at all, is using cardboard or newspaper to line the bottom. And that's a great way of kind of getting started, because that'll decompose over time and add nutrients and not hurt at all. But it'll help you kind of get that base if you need it, to kind of knock down some of those weed plants that might be underneath it. But anytime you put 6 to 12 inches of soil on top of plants, it's usually going to kill them. Just whack them down real low, put your soil on top, you'll be ready to roll. The only time I would really recommend it is for vole protection, but even voles can get through it. So then we might look at a lot of different options that we do have to prevent voles from getting in there. Let's see. Do you recommend replacing peat with core? So coconut core, Heather, is a great option. So I don't sell a lot of coconut core here. It's a little, what I will tell you, it's a little bit more expensive than peat moss. Now, peat moss, I know, has its issues as well because where it comes from and are we depleting that nutrient. But where we are getting peat from nowadays, at least where we get our peat from, is a sustainable source. So it is not, this company is not going and robbing it from the bogs in Canada, which I know is where a lot of the peat comes from. But these are renewable beds that they're getting them from. But coconut coir is a great option if you can find it. It's typically going to be a little bit more expensive. You're typically not going to find it in a smaller bag than maybe a 2 cubic foot size. And Heather, if you live locally and that is what you definitely want to use, let us know. We can see if we can get some for you. Black gold, which, let's see, I don't have the bags, but if you saw those little tiny bags of soil that I was holding up, Black Gold is an amazing company that makes lots and lots of soil amendments as well as potting soils. And they carry a coconut coir. It just comes in a 2 cubic foot bag. It gets very heavy because it holds moisture like peat moss does. But it's a great option, Heather. So if that's something that you want and you can't seem to find anywhere, let us know. Because we can probably get you a few bags in if you need a fair amount. We can easily order that for you as a special order. That is not a problem at all. But if you want to use peat, peat is a great option. It's a little bit easier source for us and it keeps the price down a little bit more. So peat moss is a great option as well. All right, so Karen says, do you recommend putting some kind of barrier at the base of the raised bed to keep out chipmunks? So just kind of answer that question. Yes, use a weed fabric for chipmunks, voles, things that are coming up from underneath to eat your roots of your plants. That is a great option if you're talking about on top. I didn't really get into all of that. I do always recommend mulching my beds, my vegetable beds. I love mulch. I think it finishes it off. I think it makes it look very nice. I think it helps keep the moisture in, helps keep some insects away as well, especially if you're using cedar mulch. But mulch is a great option. Now, if you're talking about chipmunks coming from the top down into your raised bed, then yeah, you can use a weed fabric as well. What I love is Soil Perfector for voles. I don't know chipmunks real well, Karen. I know they're a nuisance up north. We don't have them here. So I don't know exactly the extent of their damage, but if they're getting into the root system of plants, then Soil Perfector is a great option. It's a very sharp rock that basically you can plant your plants around. It's a great soil amendment. It helps with drainage. You would replace your perlite with Soil Perfector. I didn't mention that, but it's a great option to keep the voles out from eating the root system. Now, if chipmunks are eating the tops of the plants, what I love about raised beds is you have this frame that you can attach different structures to. So you can attach some poles on the outside of your raised bed that you can then put a net over top of. Or you can build some sort of barrier system that you might use. Now, of course, the easiest option, I think, is using some sort of organic repellent over the top of your plants if they're eating the tops of your plants. So if chipmunks, I would assume, are probably more like deer and rabbits and they're going to eat the top of the plant, then using a liquid formulation that's organic and safe for edible plants is a great option. But if you want to form some sort of barrier, that's what I love about raised beds, is you have the ability to put some sort of structure around your raised beds very quickly and easily, rather than if it's just in the ground, you got to stake some stuff into the ground, you got to try and build some sort of system. You have the frame, you have the framework to work off of, which is why I love raised beds. So I hope that helps answer your question, Karen. I need to do some research on chipmunks. We just don't have them in this area. Sharon Boss said, can you use raised bed mix in containers? What exactly is the difference between potting mix and raised bed mix? Okay, great question. Potting mixes are very, very light and very airy and designed for pots that might have just a single drain hole. So you know that you're going to get very, very good drainage out of them. They also have a wetting agent in them, which is going to help as they become very dry. So let's say you forget to water your containers for a long time. That wetting agent will help keep that soil loose longer. Because what can happen to potting soils and all soil is if it gets very dry, it can become as hard as a rock and it takes a long time to absorb moisture again and get that soil back loose again. We see it a lot, you know, if you forget to water a hanging basket in that soil or anything in a container, that soil starts to pull away from the wall of the pot. And that's starting to form this really hard brick of soil. And then when you water it, the water just goes on the outside and goes right through, and you think you watered it, but you really didn't. You got to soak it again and again and again to get it loose again. Well, the wetting agent in a potting soil will help get that soil looser, and help prevent it from becoming a brick quicker. Now, raised bed mix, you're not going to have as many of these issues with raised beds because you're talking about usually a larger soil mass. Raised bed mix is going to be a little bit thicker. It's going to not have as much perlite and vermiculite in it and a little bit less peat. It's going to be more barky and more chunkier, more along the lines of a compost, but got all the other elements in it as well. So it's basically going to have compost, peat, and perlite all mixed into one bag so that you're ready to go, and it's going to be a third ratio of some degree so that you can pour it right in there. I would not use, so great point here, Sharon, I would not use a raised bed mix in a pot because it's going to hold more moisture. It's a thicker formulation and it's going to hold more moisture. Works great in a raised bed. Huge drain hole at the bottom of a raised bed, right? You know, the soil, the water's going to go right through. Not a problem. So a thicker formulation might be better for your raised bed. In a pot, because you might have less drain holes, you're not going to have as much way for that water to get out. It's going to get clogged faster, and you're going to create a boggy kind of wet condition with a raised bed mix. So raised bed mixes and planting mixes. So if you ever look at a soil, ours say potting, so designed for pots. But if you ever get a soil that says planting mix, like a vegetable or garden planting mix, or a tree or shrub planting mix, those are going to be the same things as a raised bed mix. They're going to be a thicker formulation. They're designed to amend the soil or designed to go straight into the ground or straight into a raised bed. And a planting mix is going to be the same thing. It's going to be designed to amend the soil in the ground to plant your plant. But a potting soil is designed for pots. A raised bed is designed for a raised bed mix, or a raised bed mix is designed for a raised bed. So don't the only thing that you can do is you can put potting soil directly into a raised bed. But you can't go the opposite direction. You can't put a raised bed mix directly into a pot. Not enough drainage, and it's going to become a boggy kind of mess eventually. So Sharon, I hope that answers your question. Great question. Love that question. All right, and then Karen said thank you, and I guess that's it. So you all have a great day. I hope I answered all your questions. Thanks again for joining us. And really, for you that are left there, that are still watching me, I really encourage you to come and check out our seminar in a couple weeks. If you want to redo your lawn, that's next week. But in 2 weeks, we're going to be doing one all about cold crops. And one of my favorite vegetables to grow is the fall season. It's so rewarding, so simple, so easy. I just love it so much, and there's a huge diversity as well. So if you tried tomatoes and squash and zucchini, and maybe you didn't have a great successful season with it, don't give up. I've got a great season coming your way. This is kale right here. Look at this. I mean, just that gorgeous kale, and then lettuces and spinaches. So I couldn't be more excited to tell you all about that. It's one of my favorite seasons to grow in. It's starting to get cooler. We're all sick of summer, I know. We're ready to get some cooler weather. So as that comes, we'll get prepared, and we'll start talking about that in a couple weeks. So come and join me for that. We've got a huge list of seminars already on our website. So we've got more and more coming. I'm really excited to continue to do these. So thank you all for joining. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week if you join us for our lawn seminar, how to refurbish your lawn for this coming fall season. Have a great day. See you all later.